Imagine this, a quiet evening, a familiar street, the hum of life going on, just as it always has. We believe that ordinary moments are safe, predictable, unremarkable. But what if they weren't? What if hidden inside the most normal nights are things that don't belong, truths so impossible that they twist the world we know into something unrecognizable? Tonight, we'll step into 3 stories, each one true, each beginning in comfort, routine, or coincidence, and each ending somewhere beyond logic. Think you know how a story ends. Think again. I remember this story because it started with something so ordinary, so unremarkable that it could have happened to any one of us. A quiet night, a cup of coffee going cold, the television murmuring low in the background. That's how Daniel Ray's night began. He lived in a small Illinois suburb, a man who liked routine, who liked things to stay predictable. But as he told it, that was the problem with life. You never know when the ordinary decides to stop behaving like it should. It was just past midnight when Daniel heard a knock at his door. 3 slow knocks, polite but deliberate. He wasn't expecting anyone, and the sound felt out of place against the stillness. He told me he hesitated for a second, thinking maybe he imagined it, but then it came again. He looked through the glass and saw his neighbor, Mr. Hensley, the old man who lived alone next door. Daniel recognized him instantly, even in the dim porch light. He was wearing the same brown jacket he always wore while watering his plants, and in one hand he was holding a flashlight, though it wasn't turned on. Daniel said something and his gut felt off, but he opened the door halfway anyway and greeted him. "Mr. Hensley, everything okay?" The man smiled faintly, that small, tired smile that old people sometimes give when they don't want to be a bother. "Sorry to wake you," he said. "My cat's gone missing." "I thought I saw her come this way." Daniel relaxed a little, told him he hadn't seen any cat that night, but if he did, he'd let him know. Mr. Hensley nodded, thanked him, and then turned to leave, disappearing slowly into the drizzle. Daniel went back inside, but as he sat down, he couldn't shake the image of his neighbor's face, pale, drawn, almost colorless. He chalked it up to the porch light. Still, something about the man's tone lingered with him, that hollow calm. He didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, when Daniel stepped outside to grab his paper, he saw 2 police cars parked in front of Hensley's house, yellow tape, neighbors gathering. He walked over, asked what had happened, and the officer told him Mr. Hensley had been found dead in his bed that morning. Heart attack, they said. But the strange thing, the thing that made Daniel's world tilt just slightly off its axis, was when the officer said, "He's been dead at least 2 days." Daniel stood there, the words bouncing around in his head. "No," he said quietly, "that can't be right. I just talked to him last night." The officer frowned, assuming Daniel was confused. But Daniel wasn't confused. He remembered the wet footprints on his porch, the smell of rain, the old man's voice asking about his cat. It was real, every detail. That night, Daniel didn't turn the TV on. He sat in silence, the house breathing softly around him. When midnight came, he told himself not to think about it, but then he heard it again. 3 knocks, soft, steady, at exactly the same time as before. He froze, heart thudding. He didn't move. He just sat there, listening, counting the seconds. The knocks didn't come again. When morning came, he tried to convince himself it was the wind, or kids, or maybe the old pipes, anything. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. Because the next night it happened again, always the same. 3 knocks, same time, same rhythm. By the 4th night, Daniel couldn't take it. When the knocking started, he called out, his voice shaking, "What do you want from me?" There was silence for a moment, and then a reply, a whisper that slid through the cracks of the door. "You said you'd help me find her." Daniel said his stomach dropped. He didn't even remember if he screamed or not. The next morning, he didn't go to work. He didn't eat. He sat by the door all day, waiting. At some point, he fell asleep in the chair. When he woke up, it was dark again, midnight. He told me he tried to stay calm. He told me he wasn't going to answer this time, no matter what. But when the knocking started again, his curiosity got the better of him. He slowly turned the knob and opened the door. The porch was empty, but the sound of rain had returned, soft and cold, and when he looked down, he saw wet footprints leading from the edge of his porch into his living room. He followed them, step by step, until they stopped in the middle of the carpet, right in front of the chair he'd been sitting in all week. That's where he found it, a small clump of white cat fur, soaked and matted with mud. That was the last anyone heard from Daniel. 2 days later, his sister went to check on him. The front door was open, the chair was empty, the house was quiet. But when the police pulled the doorbell footage, what they saw chilled them. Daniel sitting there, talking softly, nodding, listening, but there was no one on the other side of the door. No one. They said the video ended when he got up to open it, and that's when the footage cut to static. No one ever figured out what happened to him. The neighbors said they sometimes still hear knocking around midnight when it rains. Always 3 knocks. Always at the same house, and if you're ever there and you hear them too, don't answer, because maybe some doors aren't meant to be opened at all. There's another story I want to tell you, one that still leaves me uneasy whenever I think about it. It began with a family I met a few years ago, the Suttons. They were the kind of people who believed in starting fresh. After years of city life, they moved into a quiet 2-story house on the edge of town, a place surrounded by oak trees and silence thick enough to hear your own thoughts. The house was old, but charming, the kind that holds memories in its walls. When they moved in, everything seemed perfect, until the day Mrs. Sutton went up into the attic. She was cleaning dust and cobwebs, opening boxes left by the previous owners, when she found a small photograph inside a cracked wooden frame. It was a picture of a little girl, maybe 8 years old, with soft curls, a white dress, and a stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her arms. The photo was yellowed with age, but there was something sweet about it. Mrs. Sutton thought it was adorable. She cleaned the frame and hung it on the hallway wall, right outside her daughter Lily's bedroom. She said it made the house feel lived in, like it already had a story. At first, everything was normal, but about a week later, Lily started talking to someone. Mrs. Sutton told me it didn't worry her at first. Every child has imaginary friends. But then Lily gave the friend a name, Mila. When Mrs. Sutton asked where she met Mila, Lily said, "She lives here." She was waiting for me. It sounded like something a child might say, so the Suttons laughed it off until the strange things began. One night, Mrs. Sutton woke up around 2 a.m. and heard her daughter laughing. It wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from dreams. It was a conversation, like she was responding to someone. Mrs. Sutton walked down the hall and opened the door. Lily was sitting up on the bed, smiling at the corner of the room. Mrs. Sutton turned on the light, and Lily looked at her and said, "Shh, you'll scare her." When her mother asked who she meant, Lily said softly, "Mila. She doesn't like grown-ups." That was the first time the Suttons felt something was wrong. A few days later, their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove, came over with cookies to welcome them to the neighborhood. As she walked through the hall, her eyes landed on the photograph. The cookies nearly slipped from her hands. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. Mrs. Sutton explained that it had been in the attic when they moved in. Mrs. Hargrove's face went pale. "That's Mila Reyes," she said. "She disappeared 15 years ago. This was her house." Mrs. Sutton felt her heart skip. The old woman went on to explain that Mila had vanished one stormy night, and no trace of her was ever found. Her parents moved away a few months later. No one had lived there long since. That evening, when Mr. Sutton got home, they agreed to take the photo down. But when they went to the hallway, it was gone. The nail was still in the wall, but the frame had vanished completely. They searched everywhere, attic, closets, even the garbage bins. Nothing. That night, Lily seemed quieter than usual. When her mother tucked her in, she asked, "Did you touch the picture, sweetie?" Lily shook her head. "Mila took it. She said she doesn't need it anymore." Mrs. Sutton felt a chill crawl up her spine. Why would she say that? Lily smiled sleepily. "Because she found her home." Those were the last words she said before turning over and falling asleep. The Suttons barely slept that night. Mr. Sutton swore he heard footsteps pacing down the hall around 3 in the morning, soft and deliberate, like a child trying not to wake anyone. But when he checked, the hallway was empty. Still, he could feel something, a change in the air, a coldness, as if the house itself was holding its breath. 2 weeks later, the family decided to move out. They couldn't stand the atmosphere anymore. Every picture they hung would tilt slightly overnight. Toys would be found rearranged in circles, and Lily, who once chattered constantly about her imaginary friend, had stopped talking almost completely. Before they left, Mrs. Sutton went up to the attic one last time to make sure nothing was left behind. She swore she could smell the faint scent of lavender and dust. And in the far corner, she thought she saw something glinting under the light from the small round window. She stepped closer. It was the photograph, lying face down. The frame was cracked again, just like when she'd found it. But when she turned it over, the image was different. The little girl was no longer smiling. The Suttons never came back. They sold the house quietly and left town. Months later, new owners moved in. They painted the walls, replaced the floors, made the house their own. But on their first stormy night, when lightning flashed through the windows, They said they could see something hanging for just a split second on the hallway wall. A small photograph of a little girl with a stuffed rabbit smiling faintly at the camera. And sometimes late at night, the new owners hear the sound of a child's laughter drifting down the hallway, soft and distant, as if coming from behind the walls. When they go to check, there's nothing there, just that empty nail on the wall, still waiting for the picture to come back. There's one more story I want to share with you, one that feels less like a ghost story and more like a quiet reminder that not every goodbye stays buried in time. This one belongs to a man named Marcus Hill. I remember meeting him once through a mutual friend years ago. He worked nights as a rideshare driver, the kind of job that gave him too much time to think. He said the city changed after midnight. The lights looked colder, the people fewer, and the silence heavier. For Marcus, it was just another shift, another night where the world seemed to blur outside his windshield. But there was one ride he'd never forget. It came through at 12:04 a.m. Pickup location, Rosewood Cemetery Road. He hesitated for a second. A cemetery pickup at midnight wasn't exactly normal, but people lived near that area, and the app didn't lie, so he accepted it. When he pulled up, he saw an elderly woman standing by the iron gates, holding a small grocery bag close to her chest. She wore a gray coat and a simple scarf, her hair silver white under the streetlight. Marcus rolled down the window and called out, asking if she was the one who ordered the ride. The woman smiled and nodded politely. She opened the back door and eased herself in. "Good evening," she said softly. "Could you take me home?" Her voice was gentle, one of those voices that carries warmth even in the cold. Marcus said sure and started driving. The woman gave him calm, precise directions. Left at the bakery, then right after the big oak tree, straight until the river. As they drove, she talked about her garden, her husband, and how quiet life had become lately. Marcus found her easy to talk to. He even thought she reminded him of his grandmother. The same soft tone, the same calmness that made the night feel less lonely. When they reached her home, a small white house by the river, she thanked him with a kind smile, handed him a few crumpled bills, and stepped out slowly, groceries in hand. Marcus said goodnight and waited for her to close the door before driving off. It wasn't until 10 minutes later that he noticed her purse on the back seat. He sighed, thinking she must have forgotten it, and planned to return it the next morning. But when he did, things stopped making sense. The house looked the same, but the yard was overgrown, the windows dark, the mailbox rusted shut. He knocked anyway. An old man answered, frail and confused by the sight of Marcus holding out a small floral purse. "Sir," Marcus said, "your wife left this in my car last night." The old man's face froze. For a moment he just stared at Marcus. Then he whispered, "My wife?" His voice cracked. "My wife died 10 years ago." Marcus laughed nervously, thinking it was a misunderstanding. "No, sir, she was right here. I drove her home last night. She said she lived here." But the old man stepped aside, tears filling his eyes, and pointed to a framed photograph hanging in the hallway. There she was, the same woman, same gray coat, same scarf, smiling beside the man who now stood trembling at the door. Marcus didn't know what to say. The man shook his head slowly. "She used to sit by the gate, waiting for me to pick her up after work. he said. She always said she didn't want to leave before saying goodbye properly. I guess maybe she still hasn't. Marcus stood there in silence, feeling the air shift around him. He handed over the purse, apologized, and left. But the story didn't end there. When he checked his rideshare app later, there was no record of the trip, no pickup, no drop-off, no fare. It was as if the ride never happened. Even the timestamp between his last confirmed passenger and the next one showed a gap of exactly 20 minutes. The time it took him to drive that route. For a while, Marcus tried to forget it. He told himself maybe he'd fallen asleep behind the wheel. Maybe he'd dreamed the whole thing. But dreams don't leave receipts, and they don't leave the faint scent of lavender on the back seat. A few nights later, while cleaning his car, he found a single grocery receipt tucked into the seat cushion. The ink was faded, but the date printed on it was clear, from 10 years ago, the same day the old man said his wife had died. That was when Marcus stopped driving at night. He said he couldn't handle the silence anymore. But sometimes, when he sat in his car, he could still feel the weight in the back seat, that quiet, invisible presence that filled the air with warmth and sadness. He told me he didn't feel afraid, just humbled, because maybe that was her last ride, the one she'd been waiting for all this time. Every time I think of Marcus's story, I think of how fragile the line is between the living and the dead, how easily it blurs when someone loves too deeply to let go. It makes you wonder how many times we've crossed paths with people who shouldn't still be here. Maybe some goodbyes are so strong they echo through time, taking form just long enough to finish what was left undone. And maybe, just maybe, every now and then, someone like Marcus gives them that final moment of peace without even realizing it. I've told you 3 stories tonight. Each one started in ordinary life. A man answering his door, a family hanging a picture, a driver giving a ride. Nothing extraordinary, nothing to make you think twice. But look how quickly the world can twist, how easily the familiar can become impossible. That's what fascinates me about these stories. They remind me that reality isn't as fixed as we think. It bends, it hides, it waits, and sometimes it reveals itself in ways we can't explain. So if you ever find yourself alone at midnight, hearing something you can't quite place, a knock, a laugh, a whisper from the back seat, don't rush to explain it away. Because maybe, just maybe, it's something real, slipping through for a moment to remind you that not all stories are made up. Some of them are simply waiting to be believed.